Amazon just bought copper from a mine that hadn't produced a single pound of metal in over 10 years. Not just any mine. A completely inactive operation in the Arizona desert that most people assumed was finished forever. They're bringing it back to life using bacteria. When the world's largest cloud computing company starts resurrecting abandoned mines with microorganisms, the shortage isn't coming. It's already here. And what they're willing to do to secure supply tells you everything about where the price is headed next. My name is Alex, and I've spent the last 15 years tracking commodity cycles and supply chain disruptions so you don't have to. I read mining reports and industrial capacity studies the way most people scroll social media, and what I'm seeing right now in the copper market is something I've never witnessed before in any commodity. If you want to understand where real money moves in the next 5 years, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if it helps you see what's actually happening beneath the headlines. Before we dive in, I want to know, what's your copper price prediction by end of 2026? 10,000 per metric ton? 12,000? 15? Drop it in the comments. I'm genuinely curious where this audience stands. Here's what I'm about to show you. The copper shortage everyone's been warning about for years just became real in a way that should terrify anyone paying attention. And the companies that understand this aren't waiting for prices to rise. They're securing physical supply right now, using technology that shouldn't work but does. And they're doing it in ways that have never been done before. When you see what Amazon is actually building, you'll understand why they're willing to pay premium prices for metal that doesn't technically exist yet. The deal itself sounds impossible. Rio Tinto, one of the world's largest mining companies, announces a strategic partnership with Amazon Web Services. AWS becomes the first customer for copper produced using something called Nuton technology at a place called Johnson Camp in Arizona. The agreement covers approximately 14,000 metric tons of copper cathode over 4 years. The mine started producing copper in August 2025. Finished ahead of schedule. Capacity to produce 25 million pounds of finished copper cathode per year. But here's the thing, Johnson Camp wasn't producing anything a year ago. It was inactive, dormant, the kind of mining operation that gets written off as uneconomical and forgotten. The ore that's left in the ground at abandoned mines is usually low grade, too expensive to extract using traditional methods. You'd lose money trying. That's why these mines get abandoned in the first place. The easy copper is gone. What's left doesn't justify the cost of traditional smelting and refining. So how is Amazon getting copper from ore that was considered too poor quality to bother with? Bacteria. I'm not kidding. The technology is called bioleaching, and it works by using naturally occurring microorganisms to extract copper from primary sulfide material. The bacteria essentially eat their way through the ore and release copper ions that can then be collected and processed into pure metal. The process produces 99.99% pure copper cathode right at the mine gate. No traditional concentrators, no smelters, no refineries. The entire middle section of the supply chain just gets eliminated. And it uses about 55% as much water per unit of copper as the global industry average. Water intensity is anticipated to be 71 liters per kilogram of copper, compared to the global average estimate of around 130 liters. In Arizona, where water is arguably more valuable than the metal itself, that matters. But the real story isn't the technology. The real story is why Amazon needs this badly enough to become the first customer for an experimental extraction method at a formerly inactive mine. That's the part that should make you pay attention. Third-party lifecycle assessment confirmed that Johnson Camp's Nuton copper has a full-scope carbon footprint of just 2.82 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per kilogram of copper. The full-scope carbon footprint of primary copper globally ranges from approximately 1.5 to 8.0. Johnson Camp is now the lowest carbon primary copper producer in the United States. Through purchase of 134,000 Green E-Energy certified renewable energy certificates, Nuton ensures 100% of the site's electricity is matched by renewable energy. Why does Amazon care about the carbon footprint of their copper supply? Because data centers are under insane regulatory and public pressure to reduce emissions. And copper is everywhere in these facilities. Electrical cables, buzz bars, windings in transformers and motors, printed circuit boards, heat sinks on processors. The average data center uses roughly 5,000 to 15,000 tons of copper, according to the Copper Development Association. 5,000 to 15,000 tons per facility. Amazon isn't building one data center. They're building hundreds. Chris Rowe, Amazon's director of worldwide carbon, said this on the record. We work at the commodity level to find lower carbon solutions to drive our business growth. That means steel, and that means concrete, and it absolutely means copper with regard to our data centers. Amazon's chief sustainability officer, Kara Hurst, added this. This collaboration with Nuton Technology represents exactly the kind of breakthrough we need, a fundamentally different approach to copper production that helps reduce carbon. Translation: Amazon looked at global copper supply, saw the carbon intensity, saw the coming shortage, and decided they couldn't wait for the mining industry to solve it. So they went directly to a technology company with a novel extraction method at a mine nobody wanted, and they locked in supply. That's unprecedented. Tech companies don't do this. Tech companies buy commodities on the open market through intermediaries. They don't sign multi-year supply agreements directly with mines. They don't become the first customer for experimental extraction technology. They don't take on the risk of a production method that's never been proven at industrial scale, unless the alternative is worse. The alternative is not having copper when you need it. Now here's where it gets even more interesting. As part of the arrangement, AWS will also supply cloud-based data and analytics to help optimize the performance of Nuton's technology. Things like acid and water use. Rio Tinto has already deployed AWS digital tools to model heap leach performance and apply advanced analytics to improve copper recovery. Amazon provides the compute to make the copper so the copper can build more compute. It's a closed loop. AWS technology makes the mining more efficient. The mining produces copper for AWS data centers. The data centers run the algorithms that make the mining more efficient, around and around. Katie Jackson, CEO of Copper at Rio Tinto, said this. Importantly, by bringing Nuton Copper into AWS's US data center supply chain, we're helping to strengthen domestic resilience and secure the critical materials those facilities need, closer to where they're used. She also called it a potentially transformative moment. There's a huge amount of interest in this technology because I think many in the industry see success as being something that's game-changing. Game-changing. That's not mining executive speak for interesting development. That's mining executive speak, for we've been sitting on low-grade ore deposits for decades that we couldn't economically extract, and if this technology works at scale, it unlocks massive amounts of copper that we previously wrote off as inaccessible. Rio Tinto's global copper output was nearly 900,000 tons last year. Johnson Camp adds around 14,000 tons from Nuton Technology. That's less than 2% of their total production, but it's proof of concept. If bioleaching works at Johnson Camp, Rio Tinto can apply it to dozens of other sites with similar ore profiles. Suddenly, deposits that were considered exhausted become viable again. The global copper reserve estimate just grew, substantially, without discovering a single new deposit. That's what's really happening here. Amazon isn't just buying copper, they're funding the development of a technology that could unlock millions of tons of previously uneconomical copper reserves. And they're doing it because they've done the math on data center growth, and the math is terrifying. Data centers currently consume about 1.5% of global electricity supply, roughly the same amount as the entire United Kingdom. By 2030, demand will more than double, with AI responsible for much of the increase. Copper demand from AI-powered facilities will average about 400,000 tons a year over the next decade, peaking at 572,000 tons in 2028. By 2035, the cumulative copper locked into data centers could surpass 4.3 million tons. 4.3 million tons. That's not total demand. That's just the copper sitting inside data center infrastructure. Permanent demand. Copper that gets installed and stays there for a decade or more. Colin Hamilton from BMO Capital Markets put it this way. Data centers themselves are becoming incrementally less copper intensive, but getting the electricity to them, that is copper intensive. It's not just the servers, it's the grid infrastructure, the transmission lines, the substations, the backup power systems, the cooling systems. All of it runs on copper. Now let me tie all of this together, because when you see how these pieces connect, everything changes. S&P Global warns of a substantial shortfall in copper supply, calling it a systemic risk for global industries, technological advancement, and economic growth. A projected supply deficit could reach 10 million metric tons by 2040, with demand set to surge by 50%. The International Copper Study Group now expects a refined copper shortfall of around 150,000 tons in 2026, reversing what had been a forecast surplus of more than 200,000 tons. Wood Mackenzie expects shortages to appear far earlier, with a 304,000-ton refined copper deficit forecast for 2025 and a wider gap in 2026. The International Energy Agency places copper on a path where existing and planned mines meet only about 70% of projected 2035 demand. Read that last line again. Existing and planned mines meet only 70% of projected demand, not existing mines. Existing and planned. Mines that are currently producing plus mines that are already financed and under construction. Together, 70%. Where does the other 30% come from? Nobody knows. New discoveries take a decade to bring online. Permitting takes 5 to 7 years in most developed countries. Capital costs for new copper mines have tripled in the last 15 years. And we haven't even talked about the fact that ore grades are declining globally. The average copper mine today processes ore that contains less than 1% copper. 50 years ago, it was 3%. You have to move 3 times as much rock to get the same amount of metal. This is why Amazon is resurrecting inactive mines with bacteria. Because waiting for new supply isn't an option. The supply isn't coming fast enough. And the companies that figure this out first are the ones that survive. JPMorgan. Global research expects copper prices reaching $12,500 per metric ton in Q2 2026, ultimately averaging around $12,075 per metric ton for the full year. UBS is even more optimistic, projecting $13,000 by the end of next year. Copper rallied 42% on the London Metal Exchange in 2025, its best year since 2009. Copper is currently trading around $6 per pound. Analysts say you need $7 plus per pound to justify new mine development. And even at $7, you're looking at a decade before that mine produces its first ton of concentrate. So what happens in the meantime? Prices rise until demand gets rationed. That's how commodity markets work. Price goes up until someone decides they can't afford to build the thing they were planning to build. Industrial projects get delayed, construction gets postponed, and the people holding physical copper, or locked in supply contracts, make an enormous amount of money. This is why Amazon's deal matters so much. They didn't wait for the market to send price signals. They saw the shortage coming and moved first. They locked in 14,000 tons over 4 years at a mine that didn't exist 6 months ago. And they funded the technology development to make it happen. That's not a commodity purchase. That's strategic resource security. That's what countries do, not companies. Except now companies have to act like countries. Because if you're building hundreds of data centers and each one needs 10,000 tons of copper and global supply can only meet 70% of demand, you don't have a business problem. You have an existential problem. Your entire growth plan depends on a metal you can't reliably source. Let that sink in for a second. The entire AI boom, the entire cloud computing expansion, the entire digital infrastructure build-out that every government and corporation is betting on, all of it runs on copper. And there isn't enough copper. Not at current prices. Maybe not at any price if we can't bring new supply online fast enough. The average person hears copper shortage and thinks it's like running out of paper towels. Mildly inconvenient. You pay a bit more or you wait a bit longer. That's not what happens with copper. Copper is the metal that makes electricity work. Without copper, you don't have motors. You don't have generators. You don't have transformers. You don't have the grid. Modern civilization runs on copper the same way Rome ran on aqueducts. And we're about to hit a period where the thing that makes everything else work is in short supply. This has happened before. 1973, oil embargo. Energy prices spiked. Every industry that depended on cheap energy got hammered. Inflation exploded. Portfolios got destroyed. The people who saw it coming and positioned correctly made generational wealth. The people who didn't spent a decade trying to recover. We're watching the same pattern formation in copper. The warning signs are everywhere. Industrial users are locking in multi-year supply contracts. Mining companies are reviving abandoned projects. Tech giants are funding experimental extraction methods. Countries are restricting exports of copper processing technology. China just made it a criminal offense to export rare earth processing knowledge, not the materials, the knowledge of how to refine them. They're locking down supply chains at the level of intellectual property. When you see governments and corporations moving this fast to secure commodity supply, the shortage isn't theoretical anymore, it's here, and the price action is just beginning. Katie Jackson from Rio Tinto said the collaboration with Amazon is a powerful example of how industrial innovation and cloud technology can combine to deliver cleaner, lower carbon materials at scale. That's the public statement. Here's the private reality. Rio Tinto looked at the demand forecast for copper, looked at their production capacity, looked at the timeline for bringing new mines online, and realized they needed to find copper in places nobody else was looking. Low-grade ore at inactive mines. Ore that was uneconomical 5 years ago, but makes perfect sense at $12,000 per ton. Amazon looked at the same numbers and realized they couldn't wait for mining companies to solve this on their own timeline, so they became a mining customer. They co-invested in the technology, they took on execution risk. Because the alternative was watching copper prices double and not being able to build the infrastructure their business depends on. That's the signal. When Amazon starts acting like a mining company, pay attention. When Rio Tinto starts talking about game-changing technology, pay attention. When the International Energy Agency says existing and planned supply will only meet 70% of demand, pay attention. The copper market is about to reprice, not next decade, now. The deficit shows up in 2025 according to McKenzie, 2026 according to the International Copper Study Group. We're not talking about a problem 5 years out. We're talking about a problem that's already here. It just hasn't shown up in prices yet because most market participants still think new supply will appear. It won't. Not fast enough. So what does this mean for you? If you're an investor, copper exposure just became one of the most asymmetric bets available. If the bull case is right and we hit 13,000 per metric ton, that's a double from current levels. If the supply deficit is worse than forecasted and we go to 15 or 16,000, that's a triple. And the downside is limited because demand is structural. It's not cyclical. It's not going away. Every electric vehicle needs 80 pounds of copper. Every wind turbine needs 3 tons. Every data center needs 10,000 tons. That demand is locked in. If you're in construction or manufacturing, you need to think about copper the way you think about interest rates. It's a cost that's about to spike, and it's going to hit your margins hard. Locking in supply now, even at a premium, is probably cheaper than spot pricing 18 months from now. If you're just trying to understand where the economy is headed, watch copper. Copper is the metal that tells you what's really happening. It doesn't lie. When copper prices rise, it means someone is building something. When copper prices spike, it means there's not enough supply to meet the building that everyone wants to do. We're entering a spike. Your future self, looking back at this moment, is going to ask one question. Did I see this coming, or did I ignore it because it seemed too obvious? Copper shortages sound boring. They sound like something that happens to other people in other industries. But copper is the foundation. It's the metal underneath everything else. And when the foundation cracks, everything built on top of it shifts. Amazon just spent a year bringing an inactive mine back online using bacteria because they couldn't wait for traditional supply. Rio Tinto called the technology game changing. The International Energy Agency says supply will only meet 70% of demand. JPMorgan is calling for 12,500 per metric ton. UBS says 13,000. The deficit starts this year. What's your move? Are you positioned for this, or are you waiting to see what happens? Because by the time everyone else sees what's happening, the easy money is gone. Drop your copper price prediction in the comments. Tell me if you think I'm early, late, or completely off base. That's what this channel is for. We look at the data everyone else ignores, and we try to figure out what it means before the market does. Sometimes we're wrong, but when we're right, being early is worth everything. The copper shortage is here. The price hasn't caught up yet, but it will. And when it does, the people who positioned ahead of time are going to make an absolute fortune. The question is whether you're one of them.